Tonight, the sheriff acknowledging a potential new detail. Look here, you can see some kind of ring maybe showing through the suspect's glove.
Have you noticed that the suspect may have a ring on, like something that looks like a clasped ring?
I look at the same photo you look at, and I see it. I see people have circled and said,
yeah.
My speculation is I'm going to give that to my team.
But why would anyone wear a ring on their pinky? Is that really a ring, or is that a crease in the glove or of the glove?
Tonight, new challenges in the search for Nancy Guthrie. The DNA on the glove found 2 miles from her home did not match any DNA in the National Databank, nor did it match the DNA taken from her property. The Pima County Sheriff tells us that DNA from the home could be the suspect's.
I got nightmares in my head, I fear. Thoughts build up until I can't. My mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper. I got nightmares in my head, I fear.
If the DNA had bingoed in CODIS, then the home invasion botched burglary theory would make sense, wouldn't it? Because thieves are often serial offenders, and home burglary and housebreaking is the sort of recidivism we often see associated with drug addicts and repeat offenders.
We believe that we may have some DNA there that may be our suspect, but we won't know that until that DNA is separated, sorted out, maybe admitted to CODIS, maybe through genealogy.
That's pretty critical. That's pretty
absolutely,
big.
Absolutely.
But I don't think we need to check CODIS to get a sense that we're dealing with not just a first-time offender, but a young crook as well. Now, we don't know for sure it's a young person, but intuitively, from his movements and from what he's wearing and from the amateurish way this crime seems to have been executed, it just seems like we're dealing with a young male. And a young male in this particular situation possibly doesn't have a criminal record because it's his first offense. And the whole notion of trying to cover a doorbell camera like that with flowers is from amateur hour, isn't it? You kind of get the feeling this is the first time this person has even dealt with a doorbell camera. Don't you get that sense?
Nano says investigators are also using an array of high-tech technology in the search, including a tool called a signal sniffer to try to track a signal from Nancy's pacemaker. He says Google is also still trying to recover more surveillance footage from Nancy's Nest cameras, which he describes as a challenging process given the videos were recorded over.
So there might even be additional information, additional footage out there, and that is not including from other people in the neighborhood that still need to go through their footage. That might still come out as well. Now, this does unfortunately conform to what I was saying about a politically motivated attack. If it's a young person, someone who was not motivated by money, someone who did not mean to steal anything, but meant to basically confront Nancy, well, so far it appears money wasn't the motive. And if the perpetrator is young and not motivated by money or sex, what else could the motivation be? Suppose there could also be another motive, which is a gripe against Savannah and something Savannah did or something Savannah said on television. Meanwhile, I'm not sure how anyone can criticize law enforcement for not doing enough given the amount of manpower brought to bear on this case. What is incredible is how long it is taking to see progress when the army of investigators and police and FBI seem to have so much to go on. I do think it is becoming clearer that the issue we are dealing with, not only as investigators, but also those of us out here in the trenches trying to pass the information as journalists reporting on the crime, is the poor quality of information we are dealing with. Not only that, but part of the fabric of this case is undoubtedly opportunists and fraudsters who are trying to cynically mislead and manipulate people in order to profit from it. This is not only affecting investigators in terms of the crime itself, but I'm seeing this even from seasoned journalists who should know better, including those with a legal background who ought to know better, that are falsely implicating the likes of Nancy's daughter, Annie. Another problem is that within all the credible tips are tips like this according to the New York Times. One caller to the FBI's line, spurred by the release of images of the suspect, said that he was stymied by long wait times on Tuesday night. The caller, Fred Talbot, a retiree in Virginia Beach, said that he waited on hold for an hour, hoping to tell investigators that they should attempt to identify the suspect's jacket, holster, and backpack, and track down any retailers who might have sold them. Now, if you're doing a face palm at hearing that, so am I. Now, what I think a lot of people don't realize is that what is a tip? A tip is or ought to be a specific actionable insight from someone with unique access to the area and perhaps to the suspect himself. A tip isn't and shouldn't be simply offering you advice from the comfort of your lazy boy. And what I think people don't realize is the damage they cause by adding to the maelstrom of noise, of useless noise. Back to the New York Times, it was common sense investigative work, Mr. Talbot said. I'm sure they've got great people working on it, but you see, I'm 77 years old, I'm retired, I'm sitting here, I see this thing and I think maybe I can help. And you know what? None of that is helping. He eventually wrote a letter to Kash Patel, director of the FBI, and dropped it in the mail. Now, what Mr. Talbot doesn't realize is that there are 12,000 other Mr. Talbots out there, just like him, clogging up the lines with not helpful non-tips, which actually drowns out the real tips, all the while wasting resources. This is also, I think, emblematic of the times we live in. 1,000 years ago, having the sorts of tools all of us have, at our disposal every day, that would be the purview of kings, not just kings, gods. Even 300 years ago, having your own car, you just press with your foot on the accelerator and you can drive hundreds of kilometers, hundreds of miles in a very short time. You have a phone connected to the internet, giving you godlike powers in terms of the information you have access to. You've got air conditioning, you've got an array of mouth-watering foods piled floor to ceiling just around the corner, in your local supermarket. And yet with all of this at our disposal, all of this at our fingertips, we can still act like imbeciles, guzzling conspiracies rather than facts, just not really caring about quality. Think about the foods we eat. Do we care about the quality of that food? What about the quality of information food that we put into our brains? Do we care about that? A lot of people don't seem to. We seem to have become victims of our own excess, spoiled for choice into becoming incapable of thinking for ourselves. For me, that is what the Nancy Guthrie case shows, not just that case, but also Gus Lamont, Madeleine McCann, and John Bonet, is that you can deafen people with noise, and it really does work. Because people become so disorientated with the deluge of information, they can't filter it, they can't interpret it, they can't organize it, and so they are unable to find the signal in the noise. Isn't that what the Ramsey ransom note achieved? Disorientation, overcoming people with information. And so this idea of confusing people with a lot of information, an octopus does that with ink. When a predator approaches them, they spurt out a burst of ink, and then just in that moment they're able to escape. Well, in effect, this is also a political tool to hide what is really happening behind sudden waterfalls of new information. The difference between 1,000 years ago and now is 1,000 years ago people still had a filter on reality. There weren't too many realities to choose from, but now reality and the noise comes to us unfiltered in a flood. And what the companies want is that they give us this information. They want us to be addicted to it. They want us to be constantly exposed to it. They don't want us to know the truth, because the truth would be a much shorter story and a much shorter exposure to all of this, much less consumption of all of this. Even though the technology is out there to filter out the fluff, a lot of the fluff is what people want. Their own customized fluff. Some people seem to prefer to be entertained by conspiracy theories than the dullness of reality, which is why in this case we need 400 investigators, and why after almost 20 days we've made a lot of progress sorting mostly through useless fluff. And is that how you want your life to be? Sorting through useless fluff? That's not how I want my life to be. And so I guess the question is, are they going to be able to find Nancy at the end of the day? In other words, at the end of the day, are we going to collectively find our way to the person that we are looking for? In other words, are we going to find our way through all the useless fluff? What do you think? Food for thought. Well, thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.